Okay, welcome to today's quote-unquote showcase. Today we're going to be looking at some code. It's not a usual showcase. I'm not sure when I'm going to be uploading this. It's probably just going to be sprinkled in sometime this week, probably this weekend maybe, once we're on the stretch from Thursday to Monday in terms of regular showcases. So if you're worried about this taking up a showcase slot, it's not. It's not barely a normal showcase. In fact, if you guys really do enjoy the normal showcases, you probably won't enjoy this. I will warn you guys that a couple different things. First of all, this is meant partially for my Velocity boys. If anyone's looking to make like a health system or something, this probably isn't a very efficient way to do it, but if you have a lot of stats to reference, it's probably one of the only ways, I would imagine. If not, someone can alert me to that. So it's going to be pretty intense, I guess. I'm going to go pretty quickly, assuming you guys know what like functions are, that kind of thing, so you can read it a little bit. Probably not for a non-coder. If you guys are interested in seeing that, even if you don't know what it means, feel free to watch though. It's really not that hard to read. It's, as far as coding languages go, it's very readable. It's basically just JavaScript. So, feel free if you want to. If not, no big deal. Otherwise, I also wanted to mention that it's one of my core quote-unquote tenets as a person that a really good coder does not always necessarily have really good code. And to uphold that, there are tons of things in this file that I looked over in the past 30 minutes or so and found problems with. There were issues and bugs, or not bugs necessarily, but things that I could make look prettier, of course, for this showcase. And I did not change those, purposefully so, because, like I said, I feel like no matter how good a coder you are, you make mistakes and you leave stuff behind because you're always working on something new. This in particular, this code, this damage code, if you guys weren't aware, that's what people chose when I asked. This damage code, and this is the universal damage code, I should note. It was made literally one of the first things I made back 7 or 8 months ago, and I've been building on it since then, but I wanted to revamp it ever since, and I just haven't had the time. And I'm not going to take 2 hours out of my day today working on other stuff in the code to instead revamp health when it doesn't need it, right? Just because I consider myself a decent coder does not mean that this is my priority, right? Especially because, I want you guys to know that I'm not trying to be disingenuous with it or anything. So I hope you guys appreciate that, and if not, let me know. I understand there's probably bugs, that's my point. Don't worry, I'm aware of them, just don't go too crazy about it. So anyway, I'm going to jump into this. Feel free to let me know if you guys have any concerns or whatever, and if you guys enjoyed it, of course, let me know too. So up here we have a couple different functions, and these can just be ignored. These are not unimportant, I guess you could say, but they're not what I'm going to be looking at because we don't have an hour, and there's a lot of nuance here, a lot of functions. So there are 3 big functions in this file. There's take damage, deal damage, and heal damage. Take damage is for self-inflicted damage. You can read these comments. There's only a couple here, but it's a function to force a player to inflict self-damage. So if you have an ability, for instance, that might deal 1,000 damage when you click the button, that would be take damage. It has no source other than the user, so there's no crit, like you can see up here. There's only a dodge variable. There's no crit variable. Down here we have deal damage, which is a lot thicker. And there's a reason for that. I did unfold some of these functions so you guys could see it more clearly. I had some helper functions built in here so that I can condense it all down, but that makes it a little bit harder to explain because then I have to go into each one of those files, each one of those functions, and explain that function individually when you can't see the other code. So I felt like it would be a little bit better just to have all of it in front of us all at once. So like I said, and like you can read here, this is a function to force a player to inflict damage on another player. And I didn't mention the arguments up here, or parameters, so these are pretty much the same thing. In addition, though, they have a target parameter. And what these mean is you're doing given amount damage to target, which is the player you're targeting, of damage type, and then it's coming from damage origin, which could be a spell, or it could be a burn tick, or whatever else. So it could be a spell name, whatever. Damage origin is something I'm not going to touch on too much because I'm not going to touch on damage numbers, as in the floating numbers that you see when someone gets attacked very much. But essentially, damage origin, if it's fireball and then they get hit with another spell or another tick of damage that also has the damage origin fireball within, I think, 2 seconds, it'll cause the little merger of numbers and then they enlarge. So very basic, just that's what it's there for. Nothing too special. And also, if in the future I want to track damage down, that's just a useful debugging tool. Like you can see down here, we have this function, which basically checks if the type doesn't exist or if it's not valid. Very basic again. So you go down here, and this is a lot of code that I can't really explain until I go over stats. So don't fret, it'll become clear in a second. For right now, I'm going to skim over it though. Go down to heal damage. So heal damage is obvious function, if you guys aren't aware, is to heal damage, and it works very similarly to take damage, except you just heal the damage that you would otherwise take. So that's that. It also has what I call an event function, which is one of the 3 event functions I said weren't important at the top. Basically, just whenever someone's healed, it calls this function for them. So if you have some spell, for instance, that is cast when you get a heal, then that would go there. Or you would have a function there, which I'll go a little bit more into in a second. So we have this here too, which if you guys are curious, I think it's somewhat self-explanatory, but basically you get healed every second by your regeneration amount, which is a percentage of your max HP, and it was very obnoxious seeing those numbers come up every single second, and I didn't want to reduce the rate just for a visual thing like that, so now they just don't show up. In the future this will be limited, so if you go above, say, 100 health per second or something like that, it might show up, but other than that, it's just invisible, and right now it is entirely invisible because there's no reason to see it. It's just kind of obnoxious and screen cluttery. So that's that, and it's actually worth mentioning that this is probably not something you guys will understand. There's so much here, and half of this entire file isn't even referencing stuff in this file itself. It's almost entirely stat related here, or I mean, it's mostly stat related. There's also some other stuff like these mods. These refer to damage numbers, the floating little damage numbers that combine. There's KOs, health, all of this different stuff. It's not in this file. So this is the code for kind of collecting the damage into a single function or a couple different functions, and then deciding what to do with it based on their stats. But in order to see what we're actually working with, we're going to have to go in here. So this file is one of the sort of medium-sized files in Verdict. I'm going to scroll down really quick. It's not that big, but it's worth showing off anyway because this is the basis for basically everything else in the game. This file is very aptly named for stats, so it is very simply put a stats file. It keeps track of all of your stats. So here we have your base stats. These are all of your normal stats plus level. So if you have a 5 in Grace, this would be in fact a 5. Makes sense. The same for all of these others. And then bonus stats and total stats are the same exact thing, except they aren't base. So bonus stats, I could say add 5 to Aqua here, bonus Aqua, and then it will calculate that when I refresh stats into total stats. So it'll add it to your base stat without actually modifying your base stat, which is critical for not modifying base stats when you get, say, a buff or something like that. So you have 3 different objects. Oops, that is a bad thing to do. You have 3 different objects for each of the types of stats. So you also have one for affinities. These are the percentage damage bonuses and defenses that you get from affinity, and from these stats in particular, these 5. We have stats specific down here, which are separated from the base related stats from damage resist to dodge chance, and then we have life related stat specifics like life steal and life leak. So that's that. We also have the same exact system like I showed a couple times already for that. And here we have resources. So resources is a little bit strange because I was working on this recently. And extra you can ignore down here. This is a relic from like literally 7 months ago. So resources, the reason it only has 3 variables down here in the objects for bonus and total is because these you don't really have to worry about, or rather these. So these are stat points and spell points, mastery points, experience. Those will always be your base. You can't have bonus to that, you can't have totals to that because you only have the base, and it's always a consumable, so you don't need to worry about that as far as having more than usual goes. The reason that this is 1000 is because I want everyone when they log in to have 1000 bonus health so they don't die instantly to a golem. That's more for my sake than anything, to be honest, but you know, what can you do? So from there we have this. I'm actually going to ask that you guys don't read too much into this because this is a little complicated. I don't think that you guys will understand immediately what this means. Instead, I'm going to go down here and we're going to skip past all of this. This is a little easy to read, but I'm still going to skip past it, and we're going to go down here. So this is a very long-winded way of doing this, and I want you guys to understand why I'm doing it this way. It is primarily for readability. I get that it's probably not very readable, but the concept is incredibly similar, or simple rather. You take the total grace, which we saw above, you make its value equal to the base plus the bonus, and that's it. It's really not much more complicated than that. One thing I have been meaning to do, for those of you that are coders and are probably like, wow, that's very inefficient, I want to make a for loop that just goes through, and I want to change these names, so instead of total underscore reserves, it would be just reserves inside the total stats object, because it's obviously kind of redundant to have, obviously, total reserves inside total stats. If it's in total stats, clearly it's total reserves, right? So we're going to take off the total and we're going to take off the bonus, and then we're just going to have a loop through, and if it's going to grab the value from stats and bonus stats called grace and then add it to the total stats variable called grace. Very simple. That is going to be in the future though, so for right now it's not too crazy. So we also have refresh specific and refresh affinities. We have up here is refresh resources, which is a little bit different. It's more convoluted because it's related to health and mana, so it needs to be a little bit more convoluted. It's not just adding base stats to each other. But in short, these add, this is for affinity, so this calculates your affinity with certain elements, and then this is for the specific stats. So for instance, this is commented out, but previously we had willpower and agility, and that's what CDR and damage resist were based off of. Now they're commented out. They have been commented out forever, but now these are constants in this file. They just determine how much I want to give per stat, so they make it a little bit easier to modify. But as you can see, your damage bonus is equal to your base of total reserves times whatever damage bonus per reserves is equal to. Right now I think it says 20%. I don't think that's true for each 10 reserves you have, but either way, that's the idea. Pretty simple. Same thing for crit and dodge. Again, very basic. The reason these are the only stats that have influence here in the specific stats is because all the others are affinity related, so if that makes sense. And here we can see basically the same thing. So because I believe the specific stats, let me see if I can see. Okay, I guess not. But anyway, this is just modified so that it can actually loop through. And this is these two lines are the exact same thing as these 7, if that makes any sense. It's really just a compact, kind of less convoluted way of doing the same exact thing. So these are just getters. Nothing too special here. The reason they exist is because I want to be able to, in some cases, like down here, modify what you get from it. So here we multiply them by 100 because they're crit and dodge. And these specific functions are not just getters, they are specific to the damage functions. So these are the same exact thing. They're just getters for regen. And then down here we have raise stats, that is. Level up. That's whatever. The level up's kind of messy right now just because I had to add a bunch of shit to it to accommodate some server changes. Anyway, up here is what I ignored earlier because I wanted you guys to see the rest of it first. So when you're changing this stuff, it's actually kind of simple if you know how the rest of it works. Basically, whenever you want to change a stat, you use this function. Rather than adding to the object directly or subtracting from it, you just use this function. And what this does is, instead of you having to go through and then automatically, say, every second check if the stats have changed or send them over, which is very inefficient, this way, whenever something is changed, it's just automatically updated. So I can go through here. So say I want to change bonus stat, right? Say that's bonus grace. I want to change it by 5. So if that exists in that file, or in that object rather, it adds the amount to that object's variable, and then it refreshes out all the stats, so every stat is updated on the server, and then it does these two. And these two go over here, and these send packets to the client that are basically for the stat window. So the stat window keeps track of all of your different stats, so if you do have 5 added to your grace, this will send a packet to your client saying these are your new base stats, adjust them accordingly, right? Very basic, and then it just continues from here, so it sends the base specific stats. So these are also sent separately because I want to be able to have those different functions, but that's the idea. I think that's everything. It's a lot to go over, but I think we have enough time to go back to health and go through that. It is taking a lot longer than I expected to explain some of this stuff, but anyway, we have on damage taken, on damage dealt, and on healed here. I explained a little bit of this earlier. Very simply put, these are just event functions, or what you call event functions. They happen when certain events happen. It makes quite a bit of sense in my opinion. On damage taken, so when you take damage from any source, when you deal damage, and when you're healed. Very simple, nothing too complicated. Create floating is to create the actual numbers themselves. That's a whole different thing. It's a lot more logic and it's a lot messier, so I'm not going to go over that. It's just too complicated right now. But we are going to go down here, and I'm going to go over, I think, take damage, because deal damage is quite a bit of code, and I didn't realize that unraveling all of the helper functions there would be that massive. And I don't think we have enough time to go over everything specifically. So, first of all, we have amount up here is equal to given amount. So this is just setting a new variable equal to the amount given. So say that we'll initially have a variable, and I can walk through it step by step. So we'll have 500, right? Our amount will be 500. And then our type will be, let's say it's sound type, okay? And damage origin we're not going to worry about for right now. So it sets amount equal to 500 in this case, and this is not relevant because we have an amount, so it exists, so it's not going to say undefined taken damage. We exist, so it's not going to say target vanished, and it's not going to return out of this function. We have a type, and it's a valid type as well. I'll show that in a second too if we have time, so we don't need to worry about this either. Next up, we we initiate the dodged function, or dodged variable I should say. Initially this is false. I'll get to that more in a second. This is just setting it up. And then we refresh the stats to get ready. So, if we're not KO'd, which in this case we aren't going to be, if we have health above 0, which we do, so we're not going to worry about that, we refresh stats again. We could probably get rid of one of these. It's not that big a deal. Either way, we set the amount equal to this apply affinity over the amount with our type with the function def. So I'm not going to go too far into this because it's also a really complicated thing and it's going to take literally 10 minutes to explain fully. But essentially each of the types has an assigned variable, and when you're going between defense and offense as far as applying affinity goes, it applies in different ways. I'll go over that in a different showcase one day, but basically it's just applying your current affinity of that type to the amount, and then it returns it. So this amount, say that we don't have any affinity for its type, we don't have any wind or energy affinity, so this amount stays the same. It's 500. Next up, and for reference, the reason this is doing def is because it's defensive. You're taking damage from this, so it's actually trying to defend from that with your own affinity, if that makes sense. Next up is check dodge. So this is where the dodge variable up here comes in, and what this does is it just checks to see if you have dodged the attack, or rather if you've triggered a dodge, I should say. Down here you can see if your crit times 100 is above a random variable or a random number taken from 0 to 100. Very simple. If that's true, then you have dodged it. Is dodge is true, which is basically the variable saying that you have in fact dodged it, and then the amount is halved. That's the amount of value you get out of dodging something. Next up, we have DR. It is very simple. You just subtract the amount of DR that you have right now in percentage, rather sub 1%, from 1, and then you multiply the amount by that. In this case, we're going to go ahead and say that we did not dodge it and we don't have any DR, just for simplicity's sake. So, assuming that we aren't vulnerable, which we aren't, we take the damage, so our health is subtracted from by this amount. We add that to our damage buffer, which is a different thing. It's related to shielding, so damage absorption. I'm not going to talk too much about that because it's very complicated in and of itself, but we trigger the on damage taken function with the amount that we took, our source, which is just us, and then the type, which is sound type, of course. Then we refresh the stats again. Refresh stats will go through and make sure that everything is updated automatically. So, very basic. Now, it's worth mentioning that we don't have a function specifically for adjusting health, and the reason I do that is because we refresh stats so many times already. So there's no real reason for that. In here, we could do that, but we already, at like 7 or 8 different points, need to grab stats. Like, for instance, for crit, we need to have updated crit, because if you say boost your crit by 50 and then just run into a target and you don't crit at all, when maybe you have 100% crit and should be critting, we want more refresh stats, of course, because we need an updated stat line before we do that. Of course, this is talking about on a scale of literal milliseconds. Like, it is very clearly that would be a span of like 5 or 6 milliseconds. It's very unlikely to happen, but it's still worth checking every time we want to, actually, check your crit or check if you did crit or something like that. So we just refresh stats again, and like I said, or like I was saying, I guess, the reason we don't have a health function, it's not really laziness, and it's also not really because we don't need it. It's somewhere in between. It's just that it's not really pressing because it's already being updated so frequently, and as you can see here, the reason we're refreshing stats in the first place is because we've changed so many different variables. So that's that. This is, again, something I'm not going to be going over too heavily. It's just the mods for the damage numbers that float up. A couple different things here are just like if it's a crit, if it's a dodge, if it's big. I forget what purpose that has, but damage origin, same thing. This is all just stuff for the damage numbers to determine how it's supposed to. This should be. I believe this should be this. Interesting. Well, we found a bug today, guys. An actual bug, not just something I'm not proud of. Fascinating, really. Anyway, cool. So after that, we check if we're KO'd and if our health is below 0, because we just took our health away or took the amount of health away, so we want to check again. That is take damage. That is one function of 3. Probably, I would say, one of 2, considering heal damage is basically the same thing. And that took only 20 minutes or so. 22 minutes or so. So, I understand that was a long video. I don't know if you guys were super into that. Maybe next time I'll try to go a little bit faster. I don't know. It's really hard for me to see or tell if you guys are like with me on this kind of stuff. I know that someone like maybe Zyda is probably up to speed, maybe Prego, or the other people in the Velocity Discord I'm sure can keep up. But if other people want to watch this, I feel like it'd be better to go slower. Whereas if it's just those people, maybe it would be better to go faster. So let me know what you guys think. I really don't have that much of a say in that. I can go as fast as I want, or as you guys want. It's not really a big deal to me. I love going over my code, and I love hearing your guys' feedback. So anyway, that is one episode of Code Showcasing. That was 22 minutes. 22 minutes to explain take damage. Deal damage is... it's not really just this plus another person. It's a lot more logic for a lot more stuff, basically. So maybe next time we'll go over that. Again, I wasn't too happy about you guys wanting damage code the most, but I can see why. It's definitely the most apparent. It's used the most out of any code, I would say. So next time maybe we can go over spell code, that kind of thing. Maybe we can go over, I don't know, whatever you guys want to see, really. Let me know. I'll try to keep this up. I'll try to do it maybe once a week, that kind of thing. Sprinkle it in along the normal showcases. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. So if this comes out before Thursday, look forward to tomorrow's showcase. If not, don't look forward to tomorrow's showcase because it's not going to be tomorrow most likely. But regardless, if it is tomorrow, if tomorrow is Thursday, we're going to get a new chat, and we've got a couple other things. I think that I'm actually going to be done with moving chat, so as in resizing chat. I hope so. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys thought and what you want to see next. Have a good day.